Welcome to the Dirt on Growing, where we don't just plant seeds, we plant ideas that challenge the norm. I'm your host, Brandon Rust from FulCrop Sciences, and this is the podcast where living soil meets real science. From worm castings to bottled nutrients, microbial inoculants, and chemical pesticides, we're here to question the trends, break down the data, and empower your grow. It's time to think deeper and grow better.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Dirt on Growing podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about mistakes that could be potentially killing your plants. In this episode, we're going to explore a couple of different things that you can do to improve your cultivation strategies and safeguard your garden from damaging your soil and your plants. So, let's just get right into it. The first thing that I actually wanted to talk to you guys about was molasses. So I oftentimes see people feed molasses into their soils, and it's very common. It's something that I used to do in the past, but I learned why you shouldn't do this, and I'm going to explain to you guys so you guys have an understanding of why you shouldn't feed molasses directly into your soil system. So, one is that molasses is a simple sugar, and it selects for opportunistic microbes. And when you add molasses into a soil system, what it does is it spikes microbial respiration. And so what happens is it is the most opportunistic microbes, whoever can get to that simple sugar and procreate is going to essentially outcompete all of the other microbes. So what it's going to do, one thing it's going to do is going to crash the diversity of the microorganisms in that system because it selects for opportunistic microorganisms. Another thing it does by spiking that microbial respiration, it burns dissolved oxygen. So it will rapidly create anoxic zones in soil or completely make that soil anoxic, which will make it so that respiration ceases. And what happens is the plant will switch from a respiratory mode of metabolism to an anaerobic or a fermentive mode of respiration, which can decrease the energy state of that system by 90%, right? So once all these microbes have used up all this oxygen, what's happening is, there's tons of different types of microorganisms that require oxygen to live and procreate. And what happens is when you spike those, all the opportunistic microbes will procreate. It'll use up all that dissolved oxygen, and then there'll be a massive crash out of microorganisms because there's no oxygen either for the microbes to feed on, but then also there's no oxygen for the roots to feed on. And so that affects the ability for nutrient uptake. And so you cause a cascade event when you can potentially cause a cascade event when you add molasses directly into your system. Another thing is if you're feeding just opportunistic microbes, you might not necessarily be feeding probiotic or microbes that are going to be working synergistically. You could be feeding parasitic or pathogenic microbes that are going to have an explosion in growth rate because of that simple sugar, and then that could cause potential harm down the line too. Another reason why anoxic soils are really bad is because that not only does that O2 crash the diversity, but your media can go kind of sour, right? It goes kind of anaerobic. And even if you've got good aeration, it could still cause a lot of anaerobic zones And those anaerobic spots, if you're not using things like probiotic microorganisms, right? Microorganisms that are both, anoxic and facultative, that can work in low oxygen and high oxygen conditions. Typically, what will happen is when you get into those anoxic conditions, those are the conditions that pathogens usually grow and procreate in. And so you could be inadvertently promoting pathogens by introducing molasses. Now, this is a potential to happen. It's not guaranteed to happen, but this is the reason why instead of using something like molasses, I go and I like to, if I'm trying to feed or stimulate the microbiome, you go to things like prebiotics, like bokashi, wheat bran meal, rice bran meal. These are natural carbon substrates that will be basically colonized by bacteria and fungi, and they'll work, releasing all types of different metabolites to break down that material and solubilize the nutrients and the carbon in that. So things like prebiotics, right? Composts can be beneficial. Things like amino acids are really beneficial. Humic and fulvic acids, those all can stimulate microbiome without causing the O2 levels to crash out and cause that system to go anoxic and change that system's main function to fermentation, because that's what happens when you have anoxic conditions, basically fermentive microbes. Some of them could be beneficial in some cases, but essentially you're losing energy in that system. So if you're going to do things, and then also, microbial inoculants and ferments. But when you're doing microbial inoculants, right, like Micro Plus, which is, like effective microorganisms, essentially, it's very similar, same type of consortium. Or when you're doing ferments, you want to make sure that you're kind of doing low and slow, right? Like target applications, not doing it all of the time consistently, because again, those types of microbials can, decrease pH as well, which is another thing with molasses that you have to be really careful about, is that pH fluctuations when you're using molasses, because what will happen is when you spike that biology, right, they're going to rapidly produce secondary metabolites because they're feeding off of that molasses. So organic acids, enzymes, and that can decrease the pH really rapidly. And if you're constantly feeding in things like molasses to stimulate biology, you could be dropping that pH. So all of these things could potentially happen if you're over applying or using molasses. So me personally, I don't use molasses. I use molasses when I'm making my ferments, like when I'm making Microbe Plus, when I'm, fermenting this consortium, I use molasses, but I don't put it directly into my soil. So I'll inoculate with those microbes that have utilized all that molasses, and they've converted that molasses into organic acids and enzymes and phytohormones and other complex carbon compounds. So that is one of the things that I like to use, as opposed to just using molasses. Again, humic and fulvic acids, which are already part of my standard feeding protocols. Prebiotics like bokashi works really well. So all of those things instead of molasses. So hope that helps. Second thing I want to talk about is overwatering. Overwatering is another thing that I see that kills plants probably more than anything. And overwatering can happen because of a couple of reasons. Obviously the media density, how compact that media is, what type of what that soil is made out of. So if you don't have enough aeration, or if you have too large of a pot size for too small of a plant and that media isn't drying out because the plant isn't pulling enough moisture out of it. Another thing is too high of humidity in the atmosphere. So that way water isn't diffusing from that soil in a fast enough time to mitigate those anaerobic conditions that happen from overwatering. Because just like using molasses, right, when you spike that biology and it utilizes all of that oxygen in that media, the same thing can happen when you overwater, right? Too much water will cause loss of oxygen. And so those same things that are happening when you do when you decrease oxygen from molasses will also happen when you overwater. Obviously, overwatering, it destroys and really has a negative impact on the really fine root hairs that are coming out. And those little fine root hairs make up a large volume of the root volume that comes in contact with clay colloids and the nutrient ions that are being absorbed. So when you disturb or when you destroy really fine root hairs, you are decreasing the plant's ability to take up cationic and anionic nutrients. So, some of the things that you can do to, monitor or make sure that you don't overwater, it's always best to err on the drier side. In any type of fertigation system, especially indoor, I would always opt to water on the drier side. Than if you're uncertain, it's better to underwater than to overwater. And the reason why is because if you overwater, you can't really remove that water from that soil. But if you underwater, right, you can always come back and add more. It's all, again, I'll repeat myself and I'll always say this is a pro tip. It's always best to err on the drier side when it comes to watering. So roots need air between irrigation. You need to also be letting your soil dry out a little bit. You need some drybacks. You don't always want to just keep your media consistently wet or at field capacity. You want drybacks because the roots need access to that oxygen. Again, microbes also need access to that oxygen. I've got some oatmeal here. I'm eating and podcasting, so don't mind me. Some of the things that you can do to fix overwatering are proper pot size, proper aeration, and proper environment, right? Not to make sure your environment's not too humid. Make sure you have proper aeration, especially in these modified growing mixes, or especially if you're doing like a living soil modified growing mix and you're doing things like worms and stuff. You have to remember, earthworms will actually compact the media. They will increase the media density. And so what happens is, if your media is more dense, it's not going to have as good gas exchange, for the ability to, change CO2 and oxygen in that media will decrease. So if you're doing things like, if you're adding worms and you've got a living system in there that's constantly turning over organic amendments, you should add aeration to those. Or if you're adding composts into your system, you should also add aeration into those systems, because again, over time, your media density can increase. And so making sure that it doesn't get too dense to where it holds too much water, or you don't get enough exchange of water and gas. And then what was the third thing? I wrote these things down so that way I wouldn't forget. And let's see. Right size pots, avoid oversized containers, match root mass to volume. One of the things too is when it comes to container size is, if your plant is going to veg for, let's say, 4 weeks and to get to a certain size, make sure that you give it enough space to grow into that. as well. All right, what was the last thing that I put on these 3 soil mistakes? Oh, yes. Water. Not being diligent about your water. This is probably one of the largest ones that I see across the board when it comes to any type of agricultural cultivation, any type of crop production. Water is your biggest input. It's your number one input that goes into agriculture. It doesn't matter how you farm. It doesn't matter if you're doing modified growing mix, if you're doing potting soils, if you're doing, DWC, hydro, cocoa. It does not matter. Water is your number one input. And if you don't have good water, it will kill your soil. And the way that it does that is by contributing to the buildup of negative contaminants over time. And these negative contaminants can be things like chloride, sodium, bicarbonate. It could even be heavy metals. It could even be nutrient ions that plants use, like boron, for instance, right? You might be in an area where you're on a well water that has high boron levels, and you're like thinking, oh, this is going to be great because it's fine, or this is going to be fine because, I've got a reverse osmosis system and I'm filtering everything out. But there are certain things that can't just be filtered out that need special filtration. So if you don't know about water or water quality, or you don't test your water to see your starting point, it could be a huge mistake that could end up costing you so much money in the long run. And I've seen it before. I've seen it to where a farmer has run several runs. Let's say they're on their indoor beds. They do run after run after run, and they hit me up. They're like, dude, I'm on my 5th run, dude. This last run was all right, but I could tell there was something missing. This last run was complete failure. We cannot figure it out. And then also, well, are you testing your soil? Well, we got a soil test. Here's our soil test. And I was like, okay, well, it looks like you've got tons of bicarbonate and sodium in this. And so what's going on here? Well, where is it coming from? What are you guys adding? And I could go through a list of all the amendments that they use, or all the products that they use to put in that soil. And I was like, are you testing? But my first thing is always, are you testing your water? If they're not testing the water, that's the first thing I look at before I even look at those other inputs, because oftentimes, more than not, it's that water that's contributing to the degradation of that soil because it's too high in any one thing, or any 2 things, or any 3 things. It could be any number of things that are compiling. And it could be things like calcium or magnesium or potassium even, right? Where there's too much. Like, let's say your water's hard and it's bringing in a ton of calcium and a ton of bicarbonate, right? Those things start building up. Okay, calcium's not necessarily a bad thing to have. You can't really go too toxic. You can't get, plant toxicity from calcium, but it can start to push out magnesium and push out, potassium and magnesium. And then you end up going, oh, dude, I have a potassium deficiency, or I have a magnesium deficiency, and I can't figure out why, because I've been giving potassium and magnesium, but that's not the issue. It's that every time you're watering, that potassium and that magnesium isn't falling into solution because there's so much calcium in that water to begin with, and they're fighting for space in solution. And so those are the types of things that you have to think about when we're talking about water. And I've seen this before with things like heavy metals, right? They couldn't fit. Like, I had a client that came to me because they were failing heavy metals testing. And I was like, okay, well, we need to see where this lead is coming from, because that's what they were failing for. And so we're going through all of their inputs. We're like, okay, let's test these inputs. Let's test these inputs. Okay. And we're sending these to labs, right? And we're getting them tested for heavy metals, and we're not we're not hitting back on that lead. So where's this lead coming from? Let's go test your water. It turns out that their water has lead in it. Okay. And that lead has been compiling until they're starting to get traces of lead in their actual product. Right. So it's cases like that you can see. And then when what you're dealing with and where it's coming from, then you can go and mitigate and figure out what the solution is. I need to do that. I'll give you another example. When I was out in Prague, which is about an hour and 15 minutes from Oklahoma City, it's way out in the country. We had a farm out there, 40-acre farm. We were doing mixed light greenhouse cultivation, and we were all on well water. That specific well was high in boron, and even though we had a built-ass dope RO system that filtered that water because it also had high sodium and had high bicarbonate, it wasn't a really good water. Even though we had filtration, the boron levels were still high. And so about 5 runs in, I started noticing leaf tip burnings on all of the edges of the serrations of the leaves. And I'm like, man, I know what this is. This is boron toxicity, but why is this happening? And, I was mitigating it at first by adding more calcium because there's a synergy between boron and calcium. But then I was like, why is this happening? And then I was like, dude, the boron is making it past our filters. And if we need to correct this, we have to buy him another filtration machine that specifically takes out boron out of the water, or what's going to continue to happen is the ppm of the boron in our media is going to continue to rise. And once we get to 2 ppm, dude, we're toxic every time, and we're always have high boron levels in our material, and we're seeing those burnt leaf tips. And the same thing can be, and here's another one, sodium and chloride. Chloride is really bad. When you get chloride up to, 2, 3, 400 ppm in soil media, you're going to start seeing a shutdown of all your systems. So monitoring and understanding what levels are acceptable. And if you want to learn about water quality, you can check out the podcast episode that I did on water quality on this same channel, and it'll help you understand what levels are acceptable and then what levels are unacceptable, or at what levels do you need to take action. And then again, it's all about identifying the problem so that way you can figure out the solution. So those are 3 things that I think about, right? When we're talking about 3 mistakes that are killing your plants, right? Not testing your water, using molasses consistently, and overwatering. Those are the biggest things that I think that I see, especially with new growers. So if you can manage those 3 aspects, you're going to have a lot better success rate in your cultivation. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to Q&A time. I appreciate everybody. We've got 61 people in here. Thanks for coming and hanging out on a Tuesday. Also, check this out. We have I got to go get these real quick. Stay in your seats. I'll be right back. You guys got to check these out. Okay. We got freebies for you guys. So if you guys go onto the Bokashi Seed Vault website, or if you go to the fertilizer website, bokashiearthworks.net, I am giving out, with all orders over $100, you have to leave a note at checkout, Starfighter Cross to Miracle Alien Cookie F2, originally bred by Capulator. You cannot find those F1s anywhere. And if you do, they're usually going for $400-500, right? That is the gas. Great aunt secret. I F2'd it. I did selection work over the last year to find a super stellar mom that was completely resistant to pathogens like Septoria, Alternaria. Just an absolutely beautiful plant. And so these are freebies. We got these seeds. All orders on either of the websites over $100. You can tap in. I'll put the www.bokashiearthworks.net. That's the nutrient website, and then bokashiseedvault.com. All right, let's get into some questions, guys. Thanks for joining. Hope you guys are having fun. I was multitasking. I was eating a late breakfast, and podcasting. Jay says, hi, Brandon, can CalSil be used as a foliar? You can, but the thing is, it's not going to have as great as efficiency. It's best to get your calcium from your media. And the reason why is because calcium moves with mass flow. It moves in water through the vascular transport systems of plants. And so making sure you have adequate calcium in your media is going to give you the best results. If you need to apply something like extra magnesium, you can do Epsom foliar spray. But the calcium silica, although it's solution grade, it's micronized. It's not like a salt, so it doesn't dissolve like a salt does. So it doesn't have the really high solubility that things like Epsom salt does. So you can spray it, but you're going to have much more efficiency as a top dress or watering it in. Them beans are no joke, and they're fat. These ones are fat too. I filled up as many as I can because I was giving these for free. I was like, I'm going to fit as many seeds in the packs as I can. Look at, I just put them in those old school bags too. Your dry room smells like breakfast cereal in the 90s. Hell yeah. Can you, hey, good show. Can you tell me what type of nitrogen? It's amino acids and ammonium humate. So it's naturally derived from the nitrogen that is extracted from the lignite material. It's super concentrated. It smells. It's gnarly. It smells worse than. It smells stronger than blood meal. Tucker says, "Thanks, Brandon. Hard not to make improvements in the garden. Listening to you, I'm glad that you guys are getting some info, good info. Again, all of this is based off my experience, and then also, you know, I've been doing soil agronomy and microbiology since 2000 and started studying soil microbiology in 2014, and then 2019, I really started getting into soil agronomy and, you know, collecting soil data, reading about soil. I'm a self-taught agronomist. What up, J-Pot? Yep, and it's good to test your water too because city water will change, you know. And here's another pro tip about water. So let's say you're just using an RO because most people will just be like, look, I don't know if I have good water. I'm just going to use an RO. That's totally fine. But the thing is, like, if you don't test your water before you filter it, or you don't test your water after it comes out of the RO, it might be hard to gauge when you actually need to change your membranes because water testing, even if you're running RO, can determine, you know, how frequently you need to change your membranes on your filtration system. Any recommendations on books for soil biology? Yes. Hold on. I'm going to go get a couple of books. Just bear with me and I'll show you guys those books. Go grab them from the office. All right. So this is... Okay. So this book that I have right here, in my opinion, is the Bible of soil microbiology right here. And it is called Principles and Applications of Soil Microbiology. This is the 3rd edition. This version is kind of pricey. It's probably going to cost you $150, maybe $160, but you can get either the 1st or 2nd edition. First editions you can probably pick up for like $15-20. The 2nd edition of this book you can pick up for about $50 or $60. But if you really want to understand everything, if you want to get inside my brain, this is the book right here. This is what I recommend. Principles and Applications of Soil Microbiology. And another pro tip is if you're really curious about the physical material that you can read, there is a website called ABE Books. And you can search in things like humic and fulvic acid, and it will pull it right up. But look at, Principles and Applications of Soil Microbiology. I have another book right here that's in my backpack behind me that I'm reading right now. Humic and fulvic acids. This is the isolation, structure, and environmental role. That's a good one. Biostimulants in agriculture is another really good one. Here's some other books that are just laying around. I didn't actually grab these. So, metals and micronutrient uptake and utilization by plants. That's going to tell you how plants actually transport different types of nutrients. You'll learn about mass flow. You'll learn about diffusion. You'll learn about root inception. Soil chemistry. Okay, these are good books. These will tell you, talks about pH, redox reactions. Some of this stuff is even pretty complex for me. And then, soil fertility and fertilizers. You can learn a lot about fertilizers and how fertilizers work. I highly recommend the Principles and Applications of Soil Microbiology, though. Hands down, the fucking best book. Look, there are two books. There's another one, and I don't have it here. It's at my house. And if you have these two books, you can become basically a wizard on everything soil microbiology. And these have really great illustrations in them and everything. This is such a piece of gold right here. If you have the $150 to buy this book, I mean, it's going to keep you entertained for a long time. And I've read the first and second edition several times. But this tells, look at here, just flipping through just randomly. This one is called Microbial Transformation of Sulfur in Soils. So it's talking about microbial biomass, soil organic matter, carbon bundled sulfur, thiosulfate, tetrethiosulfate, pentothionates, organic sulfates, inorganic sulfates. It talks about all of the microbial metabolisms and different processes that happen in this one sulfur cycling process, right? And so it goes in there and it tells you, and it's the same thing. It talks about this for nitrogen. If you want to understand the nitrogen process, the different types of bacteria for each step of the nitrogen cycle, this is the book for you. If you want to learn about humic and fulvic acids, if you want to learn about protozoa and nematodes, if you want to learn about archaea and bacteria and yeast and fungi, and if you want to learn about enzymes and organic acids and how the chemistry works in the soil, this is the book for you. Principles and Applications of Soil Microbiology. I know it's the book for you because it's the book for me. And if you're anything like me and you like to nerd out on soil science, then it's also for you. IPM Outdoors for Hemp Moss. Ooh, yeah. So that is going to be Bacillus thuringiensis, Kerstocki. That is BTK. That is the only thing that and Beauveria bassiana is actually really great when you mix the Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacteria, with the Beauveria bassiana, which is a fungus. But I'm sold out of both of those, so please don't order them. Hey man, I noticed a change of the bottles I'm running lately. A drop in D-ribose from 7% to 0.5%, and this current run with the sugars being the only change, and my stalks and branches seem a lot thinner. I'm not sure what the question is. Oh, this is a good question. What are the signs of magnesium deficiency? So intervenal chlorosis, let me see. I will pull it up real quick. Give me 1 second and I'll show you. Magnesium deficiency, we'll go to images right here. Oops. PLAT. I'll pull this up on the screen here in 1 second. Okay, so this image here will work. This is an extreme case. And let me share my screen real quick. Where am I? StreamYard. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Bam. Okay, so if you see this plant right here, if you see my arrow, so intervenal chlorosis, which means that the section between this dark part, where's the vein right here, and I don't think this is magnesium deficiency, unless it's a very, very severe case. But you can see how it's in the chlorosis is happening, where you get the yellowing or the light green right in between these two sections. So in between these two dark sections, the leaf vein, it's called inner venal chlorosis. So this part right in here. Also, what'll happen is the leaf petiole will also turn purple before you start seeing the actual symptoms on the leaf, in my experience. All right, so Rusty Nail says, real question for discussion. The temperature of the chair in a joint can get up to 1,000 degrees. What is the danger flashpoint of heavy metals that would cause them to be toxic when smoked? Oh, that's a good question, and I don't really have an answer for that because I'm not an expert on combusting heavy metals, so I wouldn't know how they would react under that. But I do know that the majority of everything that I have grown, with an exception, with a couple of exceptions here and there throughout my career testing, I don't typically see heavy metal contamination unless you're really overdoing it on organic amendments, or you're using heavy applications of things like azomite, heavy applications of basalt rock, stuff like that. But I'm sure that, the temperature at which the cherry is burned directly affects the smokability, and the rate at which carbon compounds actually volatilize. So higher temperature, more carbon will burn off. It'll burn whiter. Doesn't necessarily mean clean, just means burn hotter. Am I tripping? I started using sugars through veg flour and noticed a big difference until recently. Like I said, if you want to understand, go back, and when I post this, go back and rewatch the first part of this on molasses, because again, molasses can make your oxygen levels crash. It can fluctuate your pH. It can destroy the diversity of microorganisms, because you're just basically feeding opportunistic microorganisms, and then they feed up all of that. They absorb all the oxygen, and then you're in an anoxic system, right? That can't take up cations, because so you got to go back to the beginning of this video after I post it and rewatch. If I have hard water, do I need to worry about CalMag? Yes, you do. You need to, if you have hard water, that means that you probably have a higher pH, which if you're always watering with really alkaline water, eventually it'll build up. You need to figure out, what the acceptable levels of calcium and what the acceptable form of calcium, because if it's hard water and it's all bicarbonate and you just keep adding bicarbonate into your system, run after run after run, that bicarbonate is going to build up. And then what's going to end up happening is that you're not going to be able to take up potassium. You're not going to be able to take up magnesium, and you're going to have nutrient deficiencies because you have too much, Also, we got 87 people in here. Go, make sure you guys go tap in. We got the Starfighter cross to Miracle Alien Cookie F2. They are free. They are free when you purchase $100 either of fertilizers, nutrients, microbes, or seeds off either one of the websites. They're the only way to get these. I am not going to be dropping these. They're only going out with orders. You need to leave a comment that you want to get the seeds at checkout. And I just filled these all up. Like, I've put as many seeds in there as I can. They're fucking giant seeds. Hope everybody's having a great day. I just wanted to reiterate that code. I think Grow Big will get you 10% off. All one word, Grow Big. Yeah, so the thing is, sugars in soil, you're feeding opportunistic microbes and you're disturbing essentially the balance and the diversity of microbes by doing so. It's better to promote the diversity by using things like prebiotics, using humic and fulvic acids. Amino acids are really great. Those types of inputs that are going to stimulate the biology without causing a collapse in O2 and oxygen, right? Your roots need oxygen, and you don't want that system to essentially go anaerobic, because then you're going to lose about 90% of the energy. And it's just, also anaerobic conditions are the types of conditions that usually promote pathogens. Yeah. Let's see. I just bought the whole Bokashi Earthworks lineup, but there was nowhere to put a note. It's at checkout. So when you leave, there's a place to put in coupon codes, and there's a place to put a note at checkout. But I pretty much already know, like, if somebody's, getting something at this particular point, because I've got almost 200 packs of these. I made a lot of them. And I was like, I talked to Capulator on the phone, and I was like, you want to do a project? And he's like, nah. He's like, we do a project on something else that's not an F2. So, like, we could do something different. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to give these away as freebies and orders then. So he's like, so we'll probably do a project on something else. Maybe we'll do a project on, like, one of the Blueberry Train Mac crosses, or one of the others, the Afghani Bull Rider, one of the lime stuff that I have. And we'll do Brandon Rust and Cap collab maybe in the future. You hear Charlie Brown's teacher? I don't know why. Let's see. Here we got another question. I was spraying Epsom during veg per your recommendation about twice a week. Now I'm in flower. I believe it's recommended not to spray. So is it advisable to add the Epsom to my feeding schedule? So you can spray for about the first 2 weeks, depending flower, depending on how fast everything sets. Obviously, you don't want to be spraying flowers, but in that 2 to sometimes 3 week times when the plant is bolting or putting on all that biomass, you can still spray. And if you have done that 2 times a week, you should have enough magnesium stored in that plant to keep them running. I don't personally recommend adding magnesium without testing, because it's so soluble and it can antagonize your calcium and your potassium. But if you know that you need it, it's okay. I would do small amounts, because you can always add more. It's hard to take away. So if you're going to add it into your media, maybe do like a teaspoon per gallon of water, no more than that. And then if you feel like you could use more, but also you don't want to do too much magnesium near the end of flower. Oops. Whoops, that was my phone. It's attached to the speaker. That was actually the lab. So one of the things that we're doing right now is we're doing an Ionomics project with OSU, one of the professors of biology, and then also Cove Environmental, which is the testing facility out in Stillwater. I did a thing with medicinal genomics to figure out what this leaf spot pathogen was that we're seeing all across the Midwest, which turned out it wasn't leaf spot septoria. It was actually alternaria. And and so what we did was I got all the results back from medicinal genomics. They were able to figure out which strain of alternaria it was that was infecting all of these different plants everywhere. And so we also took soil samples, and we took leaf material from non-infected and infected from outdoor. And then we also did a comparative analysis of the soil indoor that I built personally and the environment indoor. And we did an Ionomics project. And so we have initial data from this project where we're looking at what is actually happening. So we're seeing here, I can actually read the report if you guys want me to. It's really cool. So here's the report from the lab, and it says Bokashi experiment report. Compositional effects of infection status and localization on leaf ionome of microbial treated plants. So the plants that were treated with the trichoderma and bacillus and the Beauveria bassiana. So this report summarizes experiments and compositional analysis of bokashi amended plant systems, integrating elemental data across soils and leaves using different infection sites and growth environments, using an additive log ratio ALR approach anchored to iron. We show that both infection and localization reshape the ionomic organization of leaves in distinct interpretable patterns. So what we're able to see is we're actually able to see how nutrients are changing when something is infected, or how nutrients relate to the change in infection. So plants were cultivated under indoor and outdoor conditions using bokashi soil amendments, then classified as healthy or infected. Leaf tissues were analyzed for 20 elements using spanner, major, minor, and trace categories. Analytical workflow, quantifications, ICP OES elemental analysis. Transformation is additive log ratio ALR using Fe as a denominator, which is iron. Modeling, linear least squares model in JPM Pro. Predictors, location, indoor, outdoor, and infection, healthy and uninfected, or healthy and infected. And it says results, right? So location, outdoor plants exhibit strong differentiations from indoor plants. So the outdoors had increased copper and zinc and sulfur. Outdoors heightened redox activity and photosynthetic demand. Reduced BA, outdoors environment dependent uptake suppression. Aluminum and molybdenum showed opposite trends. Arsenic and molybdenum showed reverse trends. Arsenic outdoors, arsenic was higher indoors. Molybdenum was lower outdoors, and it was reversed for indoor and outdoor, whatever. So anyway, but I'm not going to read through all this. It's in there. We're doing a bunch of stuff, and it's going to be freaking awesome. Let's see. Let's get back to these comments. How long does Beauveria bassiana hold up stored in a bag? It depends, man. Some of those things, those spores can last really, really, really long time, like decades. I mean, they've found spores, microbial spores from certain strains of bacillus that were like 35 million years old that they captured from like ice samples. Viable cells. Folk, can I get the seed? Yeah, of course you can. Tony Baloney, can I get the seeds long? You're going to get them. Everybody who's spending over $100 right now is getting the seeds. So what's too young to foliar feed seedlings? I have some, I think I overwatered and they're drinking slow. So the best thing to do isn't try to spray them to try to get them nutrients. The best thing to do is to increase your vapor pressure deficit and dry, and to get that media to dry out a little bit quicker. Don't worry, Tony Baloney. What up? Oh, look at it. The guys from Lab's already here. I'm on live right now. Okay, so it might have to be mixed together because what you're seeing is essentially the top part of the soil is the darker part, and then as we go down, it gets into the more sandier soil. So,
Thanks so much.
yep.
You have a great rest of your day.
You too. All right. So they just came and grabbed the outdoor soil sample so we can continue this Ionomics project. But I think what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at things like copper, right? So when you have increased copper in plants, you might see that plant get infected more. Or maybe you have less copper and it has less infect. We can just see all kinds of stuff. Oh, shoot. I got to plug in my computer. Oh, we got a question. I was going to start my grow in November, December. I grew in Build a Soil, recommended with Craft Blend. How I use your complement of products. Also is only need humic when I feed. So if you're gonna run Build a Soil, they're great soil. Yeah, you can absolutely use the humates, the microbes, and the CalSil. And the way that I would do that is I would use the humate fertilizer just once, one application for each phase of growth. So when you're in veg, let's say you're in early veg, you hit them with that high nitrogen humate. You won't need to use it again unless you're doing a long veg time. Then when you get into transition, you hit it again with the complex humates, an even distribution of NPK, humic plus fulvic plus humic. And then when you get into flowering, you'll hit them once with the K. What I found is that with really good, highly nutritious soils, the humates work really efficiently and you don't have to add very much, just one application per cycle phase or whatever, like veg, then transition, then flower. And it makes all of the stuff that's already in that soil more bioavailable. Then you can just, every couple of weeks hit them with a little bit of calcium silica and a little bit of microbe consortium mix, and that'll just bumps everything up, dude. Just crushes. But you can use all those things with Build a Soil. And then you can always test your soil, and just, re-amend or just run, some top dress amendments when you need to, when you're going to reuse that soil. Here's another question. Would other sugars such as succinate also cause anaerobic conditions? Any simple sugar can cause a huge fluctuation in a huge spike in microbial respiration. So it's better not to use simple sugars. It's better to use complex carbon substrates. Things like white rice bran, wheat bran, oat bran, humic and fulvic acids, amino acids, even like surfactants, because they have a bunch of carbon-based compounds that are going to be metabolized for that carbon. That black light. Oh, you know what, black light? That's, there's only a couple of packs of that left. So if you're going to grab it, you should grab it now because I probably have less. I think there's maybe 5 packs of that in my thing. Black light is Limarilla. Limarilla is Gorilla Glue 4 cross the Black Lime Reserve. That's one of my staples, along with the Trainwreck Blueberry. And I crossed that into Mac V2. So the Mac V2 crossed to Gorilla Glue and Black Lime Reserve is Limelight. It's fucking fantastic, dude. It's acrid, it's pungent, it's bright, it's mentally stimulating, finishes fast. It's a nice one. Sugars and compost teas. Sugars and compost teas are okay. The thing is, you don't want to overdo the amount of molasses in those compost teas because, again, what will end up happening is that you're going to have a bunch of different microbes that are just going to attack that sugar. And it's not so much going to be like a wide diversity because the strongest is going to outcompete all of the things. So sugars will do that. Sugars will spike one type of microorganism, and then there'll be a crash out once that substrate, and then there'll be a crash out once all the oxygen in that media is gone and it switches over to anaerobic respiration, right? So small amounts are okay. But again, if you're doing compost teas, use things like humic and fulvic acids, use things like amino acids, use things that can break down easily. Like you can take rice bran flour, right? It's broken down. It's really fine. So it has a large surface area which means that those microbes will be able to attack it really easily during that brewing process. So that means they're not just going to be simple sugars. It'll be a wider diversity of organisms attacking that substrate because it's carbon packed, right? It's not just a simple sugar. It's packed full of all different types of carbon. And so you're going to get a wider diversity of microbes. Do I need the entire line? No, man. If you want, I would recommend the humates, the microbe, and the CalSil. But if you're on a budget, or if you're just starting and you need a little bit of proof, like I'm always here to help anybody who has questions. But even if that isn't convincing enough and you want to start off with just a couple of things, grab the calcium silica and that micro plus, dude, because those two products together will fucking change the way you grow. And it'll be like, yo, I got to try these other products, because that calcium silica has twice as much calcium as gypsum. It's got 51% silicon. It's got 1.7% magnesium and iron. Now, when you add that with the micro plus, that microbes are going to solubilize that calcium and convert that silicon into plant available silica really, really quick. And those two products are less expensive than buying probably a liter of monosalicylic acid from like one of the big companies, Should we feed the microbes? You should feed the microbes. Just don't feed them, simple sugars unless you're doing like a actual fermentation, like separately. You don't want to ferment your soil. Anyway, that's about it for today, guys. I appreciate you all coming. The accounts, I'm still working on trying to get all the meta accounts back, but the best thing you can do to support is go tap in. Again, freebies, as long as they're available, and I've got 200 packs. So I'll see you guys next time.